What's a subtle sign that someone is a good person but doesn't want to show it? My AP Calc teacher in high school was pretty similar to this. While he doesn't necessarily look intimidating, he walks around with a cup that says student tears and will not hesitate to say things like, "Hey, student, maybe if you actually paid attention in class you wouldn't get 70s on all your tests," when a kid was talking during his teaching. He would make fun of all of us for the dumb things we did, but he knew what all of our boundaries were. He would only say something like that carrot to certain kids he knew could handle it. He was also the best dang teacher I ever had. Had a 99% pass rating on the AP Calc BC exam over his 10+ years of teaching it. He would be there before and after school and also during lunch for help or just to let you chill in his room. They are the best teachers. He also collects ties and coffee mugs that his students bring back from their colleges, and very proudly uses them. Even though he told all of us, "Don't bother giving me a grad party invite because I will not go, LOL." I had a math teacher like this in high school. She assigned mountains of homework and was super obnoxious about showing your work for everything. I was always a bit of a challenge for her. I picked up the material super quickly, but unknowingly had undiagnosed ADD, so I would immediately lose interest the second I grasped the ideas. And showing work was painful when I could find shortcuts to get the right answers. She eventually wore me down to the point where I did show all of my work and kept me engaged by calling on me to go up to the board and do a difficult problem in front of the class while talking through what I was doing. Looking back, I realized she was calm, infinitely patient, and as thorough as the student needed her to be. She could communicate advanced concepts in multiple ways so that every student could grasp a concept in the way that made the most sense to them. After college, I went back and thanked her for being by far the best math teacher I'd ever had. She told me that she had regular visits from prior students like me, and that those visits are what drove her. I never really saw it while her student, but she had a killer wry sense of humor. I inadvertently took up her entire off period and apologized profusely when students started coming in, but she insisted that I stay for a few minutes. She asked if I remembered how to complete the square, which was a method for solving a particular type of polynomials. Yeah, I think so. She wrote the problem on the board and asked me to solve it while explaining all of the steps. I can't express how happy that made me and how proud I was to do it perfectly for her. I had a physics professor in college who was terrifying. Tough as nails, incredibly and intimidatingly smart, and, also, okay, remember Matt Foley, the Chris Farley motivational speaker who lived in a van down by the river? He was terrifying like that. And really demanding. His lectures were fast-paced and my hand would be sore from taking notes every day in his class. His homework sets were not easy. His exams were brutal. But I got to know him over time, and I saw how incredibly hard he worked to be a better professor, whether as a teacher or a mentor for both undergrads and grad students, or as a researcher himself. You can imagine that women in his class might be intimidated. One woman described how, he would intentionally call on her during lectures, because he tried really hard to call on everybody, and specifically women, so as to correct for what we now call implicit bias, etc., and, b, he stopped calling on her when she asked him to stop, because she was just trying to keep up in class and didn't like to be put on the spot. He ended up having a number of women in his lab. There were plenty of professors in the department who seemed much more enlightened, but who were absolutely the reason the so few women stay in physics. He was the opposite. He was simply amazing. Like your professor, he came across as a typical hard ass, but holy shit, he cared so much and worked so hard for his students, both as a physicist and as a person. It's a complicated story, but I'll try to keep it short. 3 years ago I had a bad cocaine addiction, still have but sober now. One day I went to buy from my dealer and while walking he said that he didn't have any real friends, since everyone that called him only wanted to buy. So the next morning I texted him good morning and genuinely asked how he was doing. We became friends, or so I thought. He took bad advantage of me. She was also a customer of him and we met when he and I were gaming at my place and she came to buy. He left and she and I got to know each other. For context, I'm man and she's a lesbian woman early 20s. She always said we'd be a couple if it weren't for she preferring women. We were soulmates. Then 2 years later, 2021, her drug habit became really problematic and my dealer friends started to like her. He manipulated her with horrible lies and deeds. She broke contact with her girlfriend, friends, and myself and had sex with him for drugs. I have no idea where she now is or how she's doing, but my mom said it's not going well. She still sends my mom the occasional text but my mom doesn't want to tell me all of it, even her parents won't talk to her anymore and they were close. Her mom was diagnosed with cancer 2 years ago and they were really close. I went trough hell because she was my best friend. I felt like a kid around her. I could be myself without being worried about anything. I quit the drugs and moved to another city. I occasionally send her a text and email to ask how she's doing and to tell her I'm still here for her, but so far no answer. I miss her, sad face, drugs are so good but they suck so hard. Fuck. I waited tables at a pretty popular new Mexican restaurant when I was in college. There was this one manager, her name was Rosie, and she never smiled. She always looked like she was pissed off at everyone and everything. The entire wait staff and bus staff feared her. When she walked into the kitchen and wanted something, the line would immediately jump to her demands. It was rumored that she was the person to fire any employee when an employee was fired. The only people that didn't seem to be scared of her were the hostesses. They were always talking to her like she was just any other manager or person in the restaurant. She scared the hell out of me for the first year I worked there. I made sure that she never had anything to be upset at with me. One day, I came into work sick as fuck and having just a really bad day. She took me to the side and talked to me for a good half hour. Just asking questions about my day and how school was going. Towards the end of the conversation she said I didn't look good and that if I wanted to, I could take the night off. Rosie was the best fucking person I ever met inside the restaurant industry. From that day on it was my goal to make her laugh. I never did make her laugh. But I got a smile out of her quite a bit after that. She was not just a good person, she was one of the best. But man, you wouldn't know it unless you really took the time to look. She was one of those types of people you know had had a hard time in life and put up a rough exterior. But deep down she was a softy and loving grandmother type. I hope she's happy in her retirement. When someone is actually in trouble / needs help, they will help out, even if it's really subtle or disguised as something else. For instance, there was a kid in my school who had a reputation for not caring about others, doing whatever he wanted, and tried to convince everyone that he pretty much had no emotions. I think he thought it made him seem more tough and hardcore, and although he didn't necessarily do anything bad to anyone, he tried not to seem kind either. Once, one of my friends at school had some sort of emergency where she needed, I think, $30. Most people in class either didn't have $30, which was quite a bit for a kid to bring to school, to loan her, or they just didn't want to give it to her, thinking they would never get it back, and she was panicking. The teachers couldn't help her for some sort of legal reason. I think she wanted to take a taxi to the hospital because something had happened to a family member but was slightly underage, and the teachers had to pretend that they had no idea she was doing this. So, this kid with the reputation collected money from all of his friends, since he didn't have the money himself, under the pretense of another reason. I think it was something like movie tickets or something for that evening. Then, he privately gave it to her, but told her not to tell anyone it was him. I was close friends with her and was actually standing right next to her when he approached us and told us this. She managed to get to the hospital on time, while he paid for the tickets or whatever with his own money once he got home. When she later offered to pay him back, he refused, insisting that he didn't do anything. I think he knew that her family would struggle to pay that back, they were having some financial trouble. I guess it's not extremely subtle in my case since I was standing right there, but that was the first time I began realizing how some people pretended to not be a good person when they actually were. My ex-wife's father was diagnosed with a stage 4 cancer. About 2 months before he passed, my in-laws' apartment burned down. No renter's insurance, almost everything went up in smoke due to electrical fire. They moved in with us. Right around same time my AC went, so I called a friend of a friend and he came out to look at AC. Did a $800 or so job and we were just shooting shit and I told him casually about the fire. He wouldn't take a penny and told me to use the money to buy something for her parents at their new place. Bedding, whatever stuff they needed. Wouldn't take the money, full stop. I used the money for their security deposit on the place. None of our so-called close friends did such thing. No one bothered to even ask how they can help. About 6 months later, he invited us to his birthday party. We went and I said a toast, telling everyone how good of a person he was. I had a hard time finishing the toast, because almost everyone choked up. Except my ex, who looked at me like I was scum. When we got home, she said, "I was so embarrassed you were singing him praises. You don't even know this man and yet it was like you were trying to climb up his ass. You're pathetic." It didn't matter what they did, apparently, because I put out the cash. The fact that I was going to pay that money to him and he didn't take it, giving it to her parents apparently didn't matter. So here are the two opposites. No regrets. They'll see a cart abandoned in the lot, walk to it, and take it into the store to use. Take. Hell, I ride that thing across the lot to the entrance. Then leave it in a cart corral for better than zero-sum result. It's apparently quite a spectacle to see a 50-something man doing this. Adults scoff while children point and stare with jealousy. My brother worked as a cart pusher in high school and had lots of tales of inconsiderate drivers treating them as disobedient peons who should be able to levitate a 2-ton column of carts sideways so as not to inconvenience the customer class of people. This was before remote cart pushers were a thing, so they literally pushed columns of 1 to 2 dozen carts all day. He said literally every time, someone would cut in front of the carts they were pushing, then get mad when the person at the back end couldn't make the whole column stop on a dime from the rear. Should be obvious, you stop the cart you're pushing on, then all the rest of them disengage from it and continue forward according to Newton's laws. I have an example of this. Had a commander in the Navy who had just arrived to our ship. My new department head. He was a huge asshole, everyone was especially in line when he was around. When I had my one-on-one get-to-know-you thing with him, I wasn't told and was unprepared. It was legit not my fault and my supervisor apologized to both of us for forgetting to tell me. I was also a knucklehead and not using military bearing when talking to him. Boy oh boy, he had me close the door and he chewed me out real good. At the end, he promised me that if I do my part and do my job as expected, he'll be in my corner no matter what. I was so nervous around this guy ever since. But one day I entered a competition in my profession and was selected for a really special training opportunity. Only 14 people in all of the military would be selected, so this was big. I was denied because it was too short notice for our executive officer, his boss. But my department head kept his promise and argued on my behalf. The commanding officer saw the whole dialogue and approved my special orders and got me on the plane the next day. TLDR, integrity when it counts. This guy was scary as hell, but he went out of his way to keep his promise. Arguing with his own boss on my behalf led to training that changed my life. I know people like this. One of my closest friends is a person that, on the surface, I used to think was a total asshole. For the first year or two I knew him as a casual acquaintance. He'd always go on about how other people complain too much, other people can't help themselves, other people make dumb choices, etc., and it really put me off. And to be fair, those are kinda shitty things to say. But over time I started to watch his actions more than his words, because I noticed something interesting. He was always volunteering to take care of other people, to the point of being taken advantage of himself. Always lending things and money, letting people stay in his house, driving people long distances, doing yard work and housework for friends while they were incapacitated, even handling some legal/accounting stuff for folks, all completely unsolicited, just stepping into the role when needed. I came to understand his pessimistic griping in a new light. He grew up in a toxic, abusive environment and didn't learn how to freely express emotions like trust and affection and concern without being punished for them. His way of expressing love gets channeled into a complaint, where he can safely say I love this person a lot and I'm very concerned for them without being perceived as weak. So and so is such a dumbass, why can't they get their shit together? From him means I am scared something bad is going to happen to this person and I want better for them than this. He's done this with me too. Is it ideal? No, definitely not. But we've had fights where he's said to me that's idiotic, that's complete bullshit, and I have felt deeply loved by that, because I know what it really means. He's also done a ton of favors for me, unsolicited. The chair of my department at my university scared the shit out of me. He was very stern and looked angry to the untrained eye. His class was notorious for being insanely difficult, and I tried to avoid him the first 2 years of school. I think he tried to curate an air of authority, but I'm not entirely sure he meant for it to be so effective. And then I had to get him to sign something for independent research on a Friday. I walked into the pod and Party in the USA was playing. He was dancing in his office when I walked up to the doorway. With a fully straight face and little no affect in his voice, he said, "I see you aren't dancing. That's all right, I believe it's your first Top 40 Friday. However, I expect to see some dancing next time. Do you have something for me to sign?" And that's when I learned that he was just like that. He was frozen in a stern expression, with a naturally cranky sounding voice, but didn't really feel that way most of the time. Another time I was at an honors gathering, chatting with a group of people. Adjacent to us, Dr. Department Chair was chatting with some students. One of them asked a question, and I leaned in to answer it. He very sternly said, "You get over here and join this conversation. You do not need to hesitate to jump into this group." It was a very pushy way of saying, hey, you are valuable to this conversation and I want you to know that you are allowed to participate. A year later, a symposium for the department had free pizza for all attending. He was running around for the last 30 minutes informing all of students present that there was still pizza and he was going to get in so much trouble with his wife if he brought too much of it home again. "Miss Hash Brown, you have been manning your poster for over an hour. Are you sure you've had enough to eat? If any of you are secretly hungry and just being polite, I will know. The department only has a few events a year, and I want everyone to leave them well fed." Still very stern, very serious, but very intent on all of us having a full dinner, and not spoiling his wife's upcoming dinner and lunch plans with leftover pizza. I don't really know how I want to word this, so I'll just tell you the story. This past Sunday at 2:34 a.m., my cat/son George was euthanized because he was so sick. Naturally, I was very, very, very close to my son and I took it extremely hard. I didn't go to work on Monday, but did show up to work on Tuesday. So the math so far is I've lost my son less than 72 hours, and it was just 48 hours before then that I quite literally collapsed in grief. What I'm trying to say is, I was very visibly upset, frequently crying, really quiet, etc. A customer had noticed that I was upset and asked if everything was okay. I had hit a place in the day where I felt like I could open up to total strangers about what was wrong, and so I told her. It turns out she lost her cat the same weekend in the same manner. She told me she hopes I take comfort in knowing George was no longer suffering and that my husband and I made the right decision. She paid for her groceries and left. She came back not even 30 minutes later with a single wrapped Gerbera daisy. She said, "This is for George, okay?" Before leaving. Her kindness spoke absolute volumes. She was grieving the loss of her own pet, but when she saw a total stranger, a cashier, who many customers regard as being inhuman, no less mourning the loss of their pet too, she reached out and offered an ear and genuine condolences. No hidden agenda, no ulterior motives, just genuine compassion.